There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West. There is only one holistic system of systems. One vast and immane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars. Petrodollars, electrodollars, multi-dollars, Reichmarks, rims, rubles, pounds, and shekels. It is the international system of currency which determines the totality of life on this planet. That is the natural order of things today.
Okay, let's talk about the geopolitics of the new currencies, the CBDCs that are very much on the horizon. So much so you've kind of been kept in the dark about these things. Not in the news necessarily, but in the level of adoption and the ease at which they're going to be turned on and shoved down your throat when the opportunity strikes. I often hear, in fact almost anyone would hear, that the US dollar reserve is ironclad. It's, it occupies, I think, about 50, 60%, about 60% or more of global trade, and it moves maybe 1% every couple years down. And that's 60% watermark. And so your average economist, which is a wagey, thinks that we're many decades away, at least 40 years away from the dollar reserve being successfully challenged by an alternative. Now, in reality, the vast majority of central banks are prepared for a CBDC transition within the next 2 to 3 years tops. And they have been researching and preparing to ensure that they are all ready for this within the next 2 to 3 years. They've taken actions to demonstrate this. It's worth asking yourself why a CBDC tracker like this is hosted by the Atlantic Council and not some Glenn Beck gold fear-mongering recession any day now type website, ronpaulgold.com. And it's because the Atlantic Council, by the way, which is it's the preeminent North American to European Union think tank essentially, but it's really a lobbying group between the two of them. It's a very, very powerful one, but it is one of the top 5, top 10 biggest think tanks in terms of influence in the international relations industry. They have this on their website for a reason, and it's not because the dollar is going to be the reserve currency for the next 40 years. There are big plans, and in particular, we can read this key finding here. All original BRICS member states, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are piloting a CBDC, and the BRICS are actively promoting an alternative payment system. Now, it's a little bit more than just payments, and we'll get into that in a second. Again, cross-border wholesale CBD products have more than doubled since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Putin has said many, many times that the sanctions effort is akin to speeding this process up. So he's warned this many, many times, and he does this as a signaling effort because this is sort of the nice way of him revealing what's really going on their side of the equation. This is how they're sort of fighting back, is they are building a alternative reserve currency system that they will strike with. And I'll talk about what that is in just a second here. But first we have to understand the difference between a wholesale CBDC and a retail. The wholesale is going to happen first. The wholesale is going to happen between central banks. This is why central banks, these are all researched by central banks. Okay, that's what a CBDC is. It's a cryptocurrency run by a central bank. As it stands, central banks already have digital currencies. If you think of accounts, it kind of is. But a true digital currency is going to also have a retail function at some level. These CBDCs are going to be exchangeable with other central banks. And that's where the geopolitics and the geography and the relationships come in handy. So right now, the dollar is the reserve currency, and as the reserve currency, it has a presence in essentially the liquidity of the global market, which gives the United States a huge advantage because they can sort of turn on the taps and create more for themselves, and it doesn't have a huge negative effect so long as it doesn't happen too quickly. With all these things aside, they've been able to turn on the spout a little bit to their own benefit. Other nations can't do this. They cannot be the first force lowering rates without considering other factors. The United States can do that. They can lower rates, that is the cost of money, without being dependent on what any other nation is doing. No other nation can do this. Okay, this is the advantage of being a reserve currency. So what it means is if you're in a recession or you're heading towards a recession, you can't necessarily lower the cost of money and make it cheaper to lend money and sort of restart the economy because you have to consider what these other nations are doing, particularly the United States, before you make that decision. So that's the advantage of being the reserve currency, is it helps prevent and it helps reduce the damages of recessions domestically in particular. You can also cause international recessions, more or less, financial crises, more or less, by making bad decisions or having breakdowns. But, we don't pay the price for that, obviously. So, the reserve currency is a nice thing. Other countries are aware of this, and obviously they prefer that if they have the opportunity. And what CBDCs will do is level the playing field. And as we will see, many of these countries that are working together have a relationship in commodities and exports. In particular, the CBDC that we're going to be looking at right now, the one that is going to compete with the United States, and we'll talk about what the North American CBDC is going to look like, because that project does not exist yet. It will under the Trump administration, but it doesn't exist just yet. And that competitor is already in place, and it's going to be called the Unit, but the project is called mBridge. It's a money bridge, or maybe the M stands for MBS, Mohammed's, the guy who kind of really put it together, the mastermind. And the premise is to connect. There's a number of partners already in the BRIC nations and some other minor countries that matter a little bit less, Thailand and so on and so forth. But the effort is going to be a wholesale to start. So it's not going to dictate what the retail CBDC looks like. So each of these countries is going to have their own digital ruble, ECNY, and so on and so forth. But the wholesale interaction, what's going to bind these together and create the reserve currency from an investment standpoint, is going to be this mBridge system under the Unit. And the mBridge system is going to be commodity based, and it's not necessarily clear in the documentation if it's decided yet at the BRIC summit, but it most likely interested in making it mostly gold backed, but also to other commodities that benefit the individual nations. So most likely oil between Saudi Arabia and Russia, and that way China will have access to oil. Now these countries are pivoting. They are jockeying for influence in this mBridge system. So this is insider information, as always. You can take it or leave it. You can consider it just speculation, and as speculation should be consumed responsibly, right? Like, it's entertainment. Anyway, as insider information, there's a lot of jockeying going on between these nations for their position in the mBridge system, and there's deals being struck. And this is one of the reasons why you have weird situations going on, like North Korean soldiers ending up in Ukraine to help fight Russia's war. And there's some other sharing and trading going on between these nations that is not public news just yet. But these decisions are being made on the basis of trade, and maybe potentially Taiwan is one of the Chinese asks is assistance in the matter of Taiwan. Now, each of these will have a retail. For those who don't understand what a retail CBDC is going to look like, it is going to be a programmable currency for a programmable population. In other words, it is going to be geofenced by a digital ID system. And the digital ID system is going to be a permanent digital ID. It is not going to be a card that can be traded or transact. It's not something you can lose, because it's far too important to lose, is the argument they will make. And it is something that you will use to receive welfare benefits and other benefits. And for ease of access and tracking purposes, this will be something that is permanently affixed to the individual, the authorized individual, upon use at all times. So this will be a implant or a surgical device of some kind, a medical surgical device that will be used to clear these things at a retail level. In many cases, the digital ID tie-in in the beginning will be a opt-in, but it will be a requirement for immigrants and refugees and disaster victims and things of that nature. But that's a subject of another video. For our purposes, we're not so interested in retail right now, because again, it'll be largely geofenced, so there will be no real geopolitical factor in that, except for the people who think, wow, I don't want to be that, I don't want this super Orwellian retail one, I want this less Orwellian retail, I want the digital tenge. I want the digital tenge. I don't know why they didn't call it the tenge. But as these countries are jockeying for their CBDC under mBridge, the wholesale CBDC system, this will be the competitor to the United States, whatever the United States pitches for North America. But they're waiting for the right opportunity. Obviously, they can't strike right now. They want to wait for a crisis. And so there's still lots of time to build forces around this. Now, with the Trump administration coming in, he has explicitly outlawed CBDCs in their current formation. However, he has not outlawed the idea of a national digital alternative. Now, this would be something that exists along the USD, so cash would still exist, but people would convert to it over time. And this type of currency, again, he wants to have the same sort of commodity basket. So one of the things that Enbridge will do is, in using commodities to back their currency, it will level the exchange playing field, and it will make a lot of these poor countries who have not had the power of a central bank that is competitive because of various GDP and investment factors. Now, commodities, they are competitive because they do have these huge supplies, even if they can't even if they're not in a warehouse or they can't access them out of the ground easily, they still have on paper these large supplies, and this will level the exchanges, and that's one of the reasons why it's so compelling for a lot of these G88s to come in and be a part of the Enbridge, which is what the Saudis are going to do, because they want to be smarter with how they use the final days of their oil wealth, and they want to use it to build political alliances now. The United States, and particularly Canada, do have a lot of commodities. They have a lot of oil resources, they have a lot of rare minerals, rare metals, noble metals, things of that nature, and it's one of the reasons why Big Don has been talking about making the country energy dominant, why he's been so obsessed with making this happen, and it's also why he's so obsessed with making Canada and Mexico. He hasn't talked about Mexico yet, that's going to happen, but he's so obsessed with making these part of some kind of union. That's why, out of nowhere, he starts talking about this, and people are like, what the fuck is going on with Canada? Well, these two countries, including Greenland isn't a country, but we can consider it a territory that has a lot of commodities, and in Trump's mind, it practically is a country in that regard. This country and territory have tons of commodities, which would make the North American equivalent competitor to the BRICS, a commodity, a soft peg currency, very compelling. There's also vast gold reserves in the United States, far larger than the expected of total mined gold is. If you're really an expert in this stuff, don't be surprised if and when this digital currency is announced. It's not a CBDC, but an alternative sort of parallel offering for what will be most likely some kind of economic union between the United States and Canada and Greenland at least. Don't be surprised if the commodity baskets as part of the soft peg for that digital currency will have gold in vast reserves that will be a surprising total, and tens of thousands of tons of gold that will be, up until that point, would have been undisclosed.
America is on the cusp of a new golden age, but we will have the courage to seize it. We're going to take it. We're going to make it a current. We're going to bring this into a golden age like never seen before. Remember,
as part of the strategic reserve of gold, it's not necessarily made clear how much gold there is in the United States that is held by the federal government, because a lot of this gold is used for military purposes, and or not just in technology, but also in funding things all over the world, seedier things, and so on and so forth. And also, the sources of this gold cannot always be disclosed for a number of very interesting reasons. And so don't be surprised if there's an upward revision of tens of thousands of tons of gold that the United States all of a sudden declares it has, to the shock of many observers around the world. This currency, which I think we'll talk a little bit more about in another video, don't know what it will be. It doesn't particularly matter what it's going to be called. Again, because of Trump's crypto stance, there will already be lots of retail crypto available to convert and transact, so it may not be necessary for this to exist in the first place. But if it is programmed for retail transactions, and if you've been hearing the word retail over and over, you don't understand. Retail just means consumer side. So in this case, it would be that consumers can use it to buy things. So you can pay your taxes with it, if there are taxes at all. If there is an economic union and it's based on a soft peg of commodity, there might be a sovereign wealth fund attached to that, and that sovereign wealth fund might be the taxation vehicle, and also potentially a UBI vehicle in terms of dividends to valid citizens within those territories. So there might not even be, that is one viable way forward towards removing income taxes in particular, by offering a type of sovereign wealth fund. The exchange of that would be, and this is worth another video, but the trade-off would be that government, essentially this international cohort between the three of them, would control a large portion of the commodity market instead of the free market. So that would be the trade-off for the sovereign wealth fund. But it's likely, since Trump has talked about it, and I think Harris also discussed it offhand, it's something that's very likely to happen before any sort of true UBI type concept could happen. Or if there isn't a UBI, it's likely there'd be a no taxes type scenario, or occasionally there'd be a dividend payout if the sovereign wealth fund does well, which would count kind of like as an UBI. But it'd be more like the way Alaska gives. If you live in Alaska, you'd know that they will give out oil money checks, basically, and it might be conditional on having kids and working certain types of jobs or something like that. So anyway, this currency could be the Camaro. I don't know. The Camaro, I don't know. The point being that these will be the two main competitors, will be the BRICS currency, the Enbridge-backed system, and the North American system, the Camaro, we'll call it. And the BRICS are going to go on a world tour very soon here and start making their case, and they will likely make their case successful. If Europe does not come together because of populist issues, they will likely not have the political standing to go with their own big wholesale digital, and they might be assumed by the Enbridge, which would be a real nightmare scenario for relations between the United States and Europe, would essentially come to an end. There are characters in Germany and France. I wouldn't be surprised if they tried this, even in the UK potentially. Other countries like Japan, Australia, it's not clear. They might go with their own thing, but again, because these CBDCs will be backed by commodities, if you don't have a lot of commodities comparable to Saudi Arabia and Russia combined, then you're going to be shit out of luck. Australia does have about enough commodities. Japan does not. South Korea does not. A lot of these Asian countries do not. Some African nations do, like Nigeria. They have a comparable amount, but again, because of the history and the relationship and the proximity, it is more likely that they will be subsumed under the Enbridge system and have decent stability. Brazil also has some degree of resources, but it's more likely to be eventually taken under the North American. So if you're following along, the more simple way of describing it is there is going to be a war over currency. There's going to be a war for new currencies for the future of the financial system. And it's not simply going to be fought by the rich and the poor, not really. It's going to be fought at a national level between nation states and new sort of economic unions that have never existed before. And whoever controls the world, or sufficient Civilization 6 type proportion of it, via their programmable currencies, well, there'll be no going back after that. With programmable currencies for a programmable population, it would be very difficult to walk away, except, again, under a Trump administration that has accepted and allowed cryptocurrencies. There will be more of a Wild West in this area, and therefore a lot more freedom and opportunity. Something to keep in mind, this will be much more oppressive, particularly in China, where I can almost absolutely guarantee you that they will have a medical surgical digital ID system to ensure that their retail CBDCs are compliant. But there's much more to be said about the winners and losers, because it's all fun and games to think about and discuss, but how does it help you make money? And that is, of course, the most important thing in this whole equation, is how does it help us? Me, but also maybe you, because I'm happy to tell you about it, to make money. Well, that's the subject of another episode, as is the timing of when this disaster, this reserve currency to CBDC Wild West event will occur. The sea swan, or whatever you want to call it, the digital swan, I don't know, the black mirror swan, whatever we're going to call it, I don't know yet. But that's the subject of another video, and so is the winners and losers in this scenario. It's a wonderful field of assets and currencies, but we don't know who the winners are going to be yet, so to speak. Suffice to say, X marks the spot, and look for that video coming soon. Until then, remember, sound money equals sound mind. And we will see you on the margins.